Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great GM. Well, in today's episode, we're looking at what makes a bad plot. Now, I'm not saying what makes a bad story. There's two very big differences between plot and story. If you don't know, go and check out some of the earlier videos. But in a nutshell, the plot is all of the things that are going to be happening during the story, and the story is, well, all of the stuff that was done in between the things that were happening. And as if that didn't clear it up enough, think of it as this. As the game master, you're responsible for plot. As the player, story is your responsibility. The player's decisions, the way that they engage with the plot is what causes story to happen. So the story is not really in your control. It's all about the plot, the plot, the plot, the plot, the plot. So how do we determine whether our plot is good enough or not? Well, the bottom line is that there are a few things that you can gauge your plot against. And of course, the most important thing is that if you don't stick to your original plan, if you don't stick to your original plot, there's no way to determine whether or not it was good or bad because you've changed it as you've gone along. So this requires you to stick to your plan, stick to your plot and see it through. Only then can you sit back and go, yeah, that was complete rubbish. That was complete rubbish. So what makes it rubbish? Well, in general, these are some of the pitfalls that I find that I have done and that happen on a regular basis when I play with other GMs. Starting off, poor structure. Now, structure is something that everybody talks about, from playwrights to film writers to script writers, you name it, everybody talks about structure. And we talk about 3-act structure, we talk about 1-2-1 method, the 1-2-2 method, all those wonderful things, which you can check out on other videos. However, the important thing to bear in mind with structure is that if you don't have a solid beginning, if the players suddenly find their characters involved in a story and they have no idea how they got there, that's a problem. If they don't know how they've got there, well, they're probably not going to be invested. Now, this can happen if you decide to throw them into the thick of things and then not give them enough information. There's nothing better than if you're starting out a campaign or you're starting out a new adventure to suddenly have the players make a defensive roll or to make an observation roll or to make an initiative roll, whatever system you're using, to start them off in the middle of combat. They don't know where they are, they don't know what's going on, but they do know who the bad guys are, and that's the people who are trying to kill them. If you don't then take them through the process of how they got into that situation, if you don't elaborate on that information, they won't be invested in the story. They've been dumped there. All they're going to try and do is get out, get away, or avoid whatever it is that they irritated to cause the combat in the first place. They won't know where to go because they don't know how they've got there. So poor introductions are often a very, very, very early mistake that GMs make, and we just don't know what's going on, so why do we care? No ending is equally as bad as no beginning. So the players didn't know how it started, and then it kind of fizzles out at the end, and the players are eventually going, is it over? Can we stop trying to figure out what's going on now? Can we go and do something more interesting? By not planning your ending, it can become very difficult for the players to realize that the game is over, the adventure is over. Now, planning your ending, of course, can be tricky. How do you know how the adventure is going to end? Well, if you know of your end game, so in other words, if this is a mission where the players have to get something, what happens when they get that something? Is that the end situation? And if so, what are the ramifications? If the players have to deliver something, what happens when they deliver it? If the players have to thwart something from happening, what happens once it is thwarted? So have your end game worked out so that you're not suddenly caught unawares and so that you can give your players a proper ending. Now, if we look at the middle in terms of structure, if the middle is rambling and the players get lost and they don't really know where to go and they're desperately trying to find some information out but they're not getting anywhere, that's equally as bad. When your players are stumped, when their characters don't know what to do, that means you need to give them information. Don't hold it back. Sometimes that can be tricky, especially if the players are no longer engaging in the story and they're not asking NPCs for assistance or help, and they're not really looking around anymore. You've already lost them by that point, so you need to inject it by having an NPC stagger into the room that they're in, or into the space that they're in, or beam in, or whatever technology you have available to kickstart your adventure once again and to put it back on track. Don't be afraid to do that. You absolutely can. Just not too often, otherwise it becomes your thing and that becomes a bit of a weakness, because the players will just wait for your grand moment where you give them more information. So that's structure. Structure can fail at the beginning, in the middle, and of course at the end, and it makes sense. Weak motivation. Now, a weak motivation for the players is their pits. If your players are not interested in your story, abandon ship, sink it as quickly as you can, and move on. Now, they might do this, they might not have much motivation to do the story if you railroaded them into the story. If you force them to go down this path and they don't necessarily want to, but they don't have any alternatives, that's probably going to give them weak motivation to carry on going, and they might just carry on going to get it over with. Read your players and see whether they're genuinely interested or if they're just going through the motions to get to the end. If they're just going through the motions to get the end, bring the end right now, make it over and done with, and then reassess as to what your players actually want to do, and then give them more of that. Don't try and force them to finish an adventure because you want it to happen. They have to be invested. They have to have motivation to do so. Another motivation is, or lack of motivation anyway, is that this is all that there is. There really isn't anything else for them to do. So you haven't just railroaded them. You've said, no, that's the village. That's the only adventure you can find, journeying to the strange tower. Nobody else needs any kind of help whatsoever, and you can't really leave the village because they won't let you unless you agree to go to that tower. It's very similar to railroading, but if you're only giving them one or two options, what's the difference? They're not going to be invested. So don't just limit their options. Let them determine where they want to go and then change your setting to fit. Rather move the tower that they need to go to in the direction that they have chosen to go, rather than try and force them to go in your direction. It makes sense too if the players think they've discovered this tower and that their characters are the ones who are the first here. It gives them a vested interest to continue exploring that tower. Whereas if you force them to go to the tower, they're there because they don't want to be, so they just want to get it over and done with. Do you see the subtle difference in psychology between forcing and allowing something to happen and just changing your plans? It doesn't affect you if the tower's in a different place. Why should it? It's all imaginary anyway. Weak or contradictory descriptions. Now this happens all the time, and there have been lots of linguistic debates on it. You walk into an empty room, except in the one corner is a pile of bones, in the other corner is an ancient sarcophagus, and hanging from the ceiling is this large complicated chandelier. Well, then it's not really an empty room, is it? On the other hand, it is empty of organic things, it's empty of people, and it's full of clutter. Well, that may be as it may be, but the players are getting confused. So when you give descriptions, make sure that you give a description of the room. If you're going to give out lots of descriptions, as some GMs like to do, they like to give a complete picture, make sure it's an accurate one. If you're like me and you'd rather let your players explore the spaces that they're in, give them an accurate description of the space that they're exploring. However, and this is the primary rule, don't change it later. If your players move into a room and they don't see anything and you haven't described anything to them, and then they've moved on and they've gone to a different level, don't suddenly, after checking your notes, go, oh, remember that room that you walked into? There was actually also a blue chest in that room. I forgot to tell you. No, move the blue chest to the room that the characters are about to walk into. So don't ever redact or go back on information that you've given them. Alter the current state to fit what you've already said. Contradicting yourself is terrible. The wizard with the red robes. Wait, wasn't he wearing plate mail before? Yes, he was, but I was wrong. He was actually also wearing robes then too. What could have been simpler to say, yes, the same one that was wearing plate mail before. He appears to have changed into robes now. It's easy. Just make the changes as you need to. There's some kind of alarm going off. I don't know what that's for. Hopefully the building's not on fire. So, and if it is, let them change the description later. Don't change your descriptions. Try and give as clear and as succinct descriptions as possible, and never avoid giving descriptions. If a player says, "What does my character see?" give them descriptions. Don't just say, "Oh, you see some stuff." Give them specifics. That's what they want. Don't, of course, give them a complete inventory of every particle of dust, sand, and rock that is in that particular room. Balance it out, but don't change after the fact. That's important. The focus of the game, of the plot might be wrong. If the focus is just on NPCs and you don't need the PCs to really be involved in order for the story to emerge, then the focus is wrong. If NPCs are required to solve the problem, NPCs solve the problem, and NPCs can solve the problem, why are the PCs there, and why are you even telling that particular story in the first place? That plot should be abandoned. If PCs cannot interact and meaningfully change the outcome of events, it's not a plot. It's an event that happened beyond the PC's control. Now, you can have those, absolutely. The whole world is continuing whilst our PCs are wandering around in their adventures. But if the adventure plot itself cannot be affected or does not require the PCs to be affected, it's not for the PCs. It's a backstory or an event. Make sure the PCs can participate in your plot and can change it. You also need to make sure that the PCs, when they do change events as outlined in the plot changes. If your villain is supposed to sacrifice, let's say, 15 Vestal virgins to a dragon god, and the PCs make sure that there are no virgins in the village, by escorting all those virgins to a safe nunnery elsewhere, of course, not by any other means of ensuring that someone's not a virgin. If they have done that, what is your nemesis, what is your villain, what is your henchman going to do now that there are no virgins available? They have to have an alternative plan. They don't just go, oh well, what a pity. I was going to sacrifice them, but they're not here now, so I give up. I become carpenter. Anyone need a good steak? So you don't need to simply abandon the plot because the PCs have thwarted your plan. How does your plan change? If the plot centers around something that is needed to happen and the PCs prevent that from happening, the bad guy, your monster, whatever, needs to come up with a workaround. Well, we couldn't get Vestal virgins from that village, but perhaps a few miles further down there's another village that we can try. So we're going to go and try and do that instead. Your plots need to incorporate your PCs and their actions. Otherwise, there's no point in following the story if they're going to not change anyway. Far too often we see this in the LARPing community, where the players have got significant impact on the narrative, but because the LARPing community is trying to build this epic LARP, they don't change the LARP outcomes, really, based on what the PCs are doing. It makes for a very uninteresting, unengaging space. So avoid it. That's a bad, bad plot. Then, routine or mundane challenges. Didn't we just have to go and slay the wizard on the Dark Tower? Now we've got to go and slay the bard in the Dark Inn. What's next? Slaying the knight in the Dark Field? Slaying the priest in the Dark Temple? Can't we, for once, not do that? There are, in general, 4 different types of missions that players can go on. One is a thwarting mission, where they have to thwart the bad guy, whether that's in attacking them, defeating them, doing something that prevents their plans from happening. Another is delivery. They have to deliver something somewhere. Another one is collection. They have to collect something from somewhere. And then the final one is protection. They have to protect something from something or someone. There are several others, but those in general are the 4 mainstays. I actually think I've got the one wrong, but you get my point. There's not a lot of missions out there, so don't try and create this totally original mission, but recognize that the last mission was a combat-heavy mission, so perhaps this mission needs to be more intellectual, or the last one was a go-fetch mission, and now they need to do a protect mission, because they're not going somewhere, they're protecting something. Maybe they have to find something out, because last mission they didn't, they simply just bashed everything to death. Vary up the different types of plots that you're throwing at your players to make it feel as if they're doing different things and keep them engaged. It's important to do that. A lot of MMOs that are out there don't. They've got the go collect 10, go kill 10, go take 10 things to 10 different people. And that's about it. It gets very routine and very dull very quickly. You have the opportunity to step outside of that box. You can combine things. Go thwart someone. Oh, but you actually find out that they have got something that needs to be brought back. So it's a thwart that becomes a collection. And then the collection mission, of course, is a defense, etc., etc., etc. So you can really vary it up, but you do need to vary it up. Finally, repeated missions, very similar to the routine or the mundane. Repeated missions that are just the same. Now, obviously, this channel talks about 3-act structure, a 1-2-1 model, all those kinds of things which seem to make it very formulaic. And the answer is yes, it is. Every single Hollywood movie that has ever been released is formulaic, based on these principles. TV shows are exactly the same, and we can spot those patterns a mile away. We're not that complex a storyteller, society, nation, species. However, it's how you tell it that makes the most interest. And if you follow the guidelines, if you add everything that you need to have, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you do your descriptions well, and you set up different types of adventures that need to happen, all of that fades into obscurity as the players are engaged in the story, in the emergent story that comes out of their interactions. So if you can be dynamic, if you can change up those plots, it doesn't matter that they are pretty much the same plot every single time. It will feel different and your world will feel as if it's moving forward. So that's how I look at a plot. Is it a good plot or is it a bad plot? Those are the different things I look at. I think there's about 5 things there that you can examine and explore. And you won't know unless you run your entire plot to conclusion. So my advice, plan out a simple plot, throw in some encounters, throw in some random bits and bobs, and run it and see. If your players are engaged, if they're having fun, if things are going well, then you know that you don't have a bad plot. You can then expand that and try different things and push them to different levels. It's going to be a lot more interesting than fumbling around not knowing where to go and what to do, because your characters and your players are just all over the place. I hope this has been useful. If it has, hit that like button. If you want to see more like this, or you want to join our growing legion of fans who believe that plot and story are important aspects of role-playing, hit that subscribe button. We are rapidly charging to bigger and bigger numbers every day, and it just means that there's more like-minded individuals out there, which is a warm and encouraging thought. Speaking of like-minded individuals, head on over to www.rpgtablefinder.com, where you can find other like-minded individuals who play role-playing games online and in and around tables, and you can see if you can find someone in your neighborhood that you can go and join in a game. Know that everyone is a fan of this particular channel, and so they think alike. Anyway, until next time, I wish you and yours the happiest of gaming.